Joining us, staff writer at The New Yorker, Susan Glasser, policy editor at The Bulwark, and host of The Bulwark's Mona Charen Show, Mona Charen, and former FBI general counsel and MSNL legal analyst, Andrew Weissmann. Susan, every action has an equal reaction, equal and opposite reaction. So Ted Cruz might have a bias toward action. But when you are doing whatever you want and disregarding rules and laws, you're going to get yourself caught up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of Trump 2.0 is essentially throwing up as many possible disruptive, even radical proposals, ordering the government to do things it's never attempted to do before, and basically kind of seeing what sticks and what comes out of it. I have to say that clip is a remarkable clip. First of all, Ted Cruz is not exactly oozing sincerity there, it seems to me. Secondly, and importantly, Katie, you notice he doesn't enumerate what these so-called conservative victories are. And I think that's because it's not at all clear which, if any, of these conservative victories, and they're not really conservative as much as radical victories, are going to stand. And this goes to your point about the legal fights and especially the Justice Department being in the crosshairs of all of it. We're going to see whether Republican senators, including Ted Cruz, really have the appetite to go ahead and confirm Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Todd Blanche, in July. He's supposed to have his hearing to be the new attorney general. It would be a remarkable thing, I think, if they were to go ahead, in part because of that Epstein mess that you alluded to.
Yeah, they would be ratifying all of the actions he's taken to date. Let's talk a little bit about the two cases. Andrew, first, let's talk about the anti-weaponization fund, allowing the case against it to proceed. What does that mean?
Well, in normal times, this would be quite unusual because the Deputy Attorney General, now the acting Attorney General, about to have his confirmation hearing, as Susan alluded to, has said under oath that this case will not proceed. And normally a judge might agree that because of that, the plaintiff's case is moot because what they're complaining about, Todd Blanche is saying, won't go forward. The problem is that the President of the United States has suggested otherwise. And as the court said, even Todd Blanche is not willing to put in writing what he said to Congress. And so the judge, I think quite rightly, is saying, before I am going to damage and hurt the plaintiffs here, remember, it's the government who's saying, get rid of the plaintiff's case. The judge is saying, if you're not willing to say under oath and swear to what it is that, in other words, that this case is going away as I required, then the case is going forward. And so they may want to have the slush fund, this sort of crazy idea of giving money, taxpayer money, to convicted criminals. They may want that to go away as an issue before Congress and before the midterms. But this judge is saying, look, if you're not willing to say it under oath that it's going away, this case goes forward.
Well, we have Susan Collins, who's saying on the record last week that she is, or that Todd Blanche has assured her that the fund was dead. Let me play Collins.
I wait until the hearing has taken place, but we had an extensive discussion on the anti-weaponization fund, which he has assured me with no equivocation at all that he is not for it, will not pursue it, it will not exist.
Here's the thing, and I think anybody who's watched television or read a newspaper or had a pulse over the past few years remembers Susan Collins and her assurances from various nominees, including now Justice Kavanaugh, and that one was regarding Roe v. Wade. When you hear it from her, though, Mona, does that mean that Todd Blanche is going to have a pretty easy road to getting confirmed?
Well, we'll see. So first of all, it's also worth remembering that the same Senator Susan Collins was the one who said after January 6th, wasn't it, that Donald Trump had really learned his lesson. She has a very capacious view of and she's very gullible about when people give her assurances. So I'm not sure I would take the word of these people. But look, yes, the other thing that is going to potentially be a roadblock for Blanche, and look, they may just sail him through, but you now do have the presence of the YOLO caucus. We saw in the last few days that several Republican senators were willing to engage in a shouting match with Donald Trump, at least in private. And so there are people who he has betrayed. There are people who he endorsed their opponents, and who are leaving. And so they may feel liberated to ask some serious, tough questions of Blanche. I don't know, but that is you can't rule it out at this point. Seems to me.
Susan, I know I'm going to guess you've seen Succession. In the words of Tom Wambsgans, ludicrously capacious is, I think, how we can describe Susan Collins' appetite for assurances, her ability to stuff them all in that bag. Todd Blanche has done a lot as acting attorney general. I mean, he says he's not the president's personal lawyer, but he's done a lot of the president's bidding, including, weirdly, it seems, on the Epstein files. Republicans had wanted the Epstein files released as part of what they ran on, and Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan write about this in their new book. Donald Trump was the only one around who was really wanting to walk it back or to slow it down, didn't want to hear about it, according to their reporting, got noticeably agitated whenever it was brought to him. So what was the Blanche role in this? Was it to release these files and do the bidding of the people who demanded it and of the law? Or was it to help the president?
Yeah, no, quite the opposite, Katie. I mean, to me, I read that account, and I think it squares with what we've observed, which is that people like Blanche or other Trump appointees, Trump gets mad at them or they feel weak in their positions. And that was the case, I think, for both Todd Blanche and his now former boss, Pam Bondi. And what they do in response is they try to then offer even more demonstrations of fealty to Donald Trump. They escalate in some way. They do some over-the-top thing that Trump has previously demanded of them that they've resisted before. And I think that's the story here about Blanche that's interesting, is that he and Bondi tried to hold off demands to a certain extent that they say are inappropriate, whether it's on the Epstein files or other cases where Trump was demanding that they prosecute various of his political enemies. And when Trump then gets mad at them, what do? They don't hold their ground. They don't resign. They actually then buckle under, or they have another example of fealty. And that's what we've seen from Blanche, is that in order to get the job, it seems like he had to play this role of the acting and demonstrate to Donald Trump he could do something like find another way to get James Comey indicted, which is what seemed to be the tryout for the job in some ways for Todd Blanche, and a proof that he was willing to use the Justice Department for Donald Trump's ends. It seems to me that was the interview, that was the tryout, if you will. And I think that's, to me, what I'll be looking for in that confirmation hearing is whether any Republican senators are willing to call Blanche on that.
Yeah, we'll see. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual lawsuit here. Our friend Katie Fang brought this on the Epstein files in particular, and she was arguing that the DOJ was not abiding by its own law. Joyce Vance, Andrew, called it a novel theory, but one that is elegant. Explain it to me.
Well, I think the novel theory really had to do with a technical issue about standing. In other words, who can sue, because it's not the case that just any individual without sort of individual harm can bring a lawsuit because of the niceties of our law. But Katie came up with maybe, I don't know that it's so novel. I mean, she said that she is engaged in journalism and that's how she makes her livelihood. She is reporting on this, and these documents were supposed to be out, and she has been following the Epstein story. And so it is hurting her business and hurting the public as well. The court got over the technical issue, the stumbling block of who could sue. But on the merits, this is the sort of the new normal we're in. The person who is going to have a confirmation hearing in the middle of July has now been found by a federal judge to have violated the law. Violated the law. This is a federal judge who has said that he has repeatedly violated the law that required documents to be turned over to Congress under the Epstein Transparency Act. I should also say that in the Abrego Garcia, you have another federal judge who dismissed that case, a criminal case, after finding vindictive prosecution and very much laying the blame of that at the feet of Todd Blanche. In other words, this is one where the Senate has all the reason in the world to grill him and grill him appropriately, not to mention that this is the person who, under his watch and Pam Bondi's watch, tried to indict 6 members of Congress. You would think Congress might have an interest in not putting in place somebody who is going to try and bring a bogus lawsuit against 6 members of Congress. Remember, if it can happen with a Republican in the White House, it can happen with a Democrat in the White House. Do you want to set that precedent? This is sort of goose gander time.